Is history doomed to repeat itself? Are we headed for another 2008 crash? Well, in this video, that's exactly what we're going to talk about, so stay tuned. Hey, if this is your first time to the channel, welcome, glad to meet you. My name is Wendy Pinnell. I am a local real estate broker here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In this video, we're going to talk about the 2008 crash. We're going to talk about what we're seeing in the market today because you know what? There are a lot of similarities. That's kind of frightening. In both times, we saw values spiraling out of control. And you know what? We need to know if history is going to repeat itself. Let me tell you, in the early 2000s, we had a fantastic housing market. We had builders cranking out the homes, and we had buyers snatching them up as fast as they could get them. It was pretty balanced, though it began to turn more towards a seller's market because there were so many buyers. You know, the only problem was in that fantastic market is that it was built on a bad foundation. So what was that bad foundation? Well, that bad foundation was mortgages. Let me tell you why. Back then, to get a mortgage, all you had to do was state how much you made. Literally, there were buying programs, lending programs, where if you stated that you made $200,000 a year, that's all you had to do. You didn't have to provide pay stubs proving you made it. They didn't check your bank account to see if you had money. They didn't check with your employer to verify your employment. Literally, all you had to do was state that you made a certain amount of money. And not only that, if the home was worth $200,000, you could get a mortgage for $250,000 based only on stating that you made a certain amount of money. Didn't even have to prove it. Now, what was worse was what kind of loans these were, okay? You could get this loan, but it would be an adjustable rate mortgage with a teaser rate. All right, so now you're like, Wendy, what's a teaser rate? Okay, well, a teaser rate is what they would say. They would say, listen, your interest rate is actually 6%, but if you get this loan, we will give you a 2% interest rate for the first year, right? So everybody's like, hey, that sounds good to me, 2%. Who's not gonna be happy about that, right? But you should know that back then, during that time frame before the 2008 crash, interest rates did average about 6%. Anyway, so you have all these buyers stepping in, applying for these loans, and guess what? They didn't have to get qualified based on what the interest rate really was, right? Because the interest rate was 6%. Oh, no, they only had to qualify for the 2% teaser rate, and they didn't even have to prove that they made that much. Well, by 2006, 20% of all mortgages had this style. They were subprime, which meant that the buyers, those new homeowners, had lower credit scores. They had these adjustable rate mortgages with teaser rates. Well, guess what happens when those teaser rates end, right? All of a sudden you start seeing foreclosures, right? Because these people, they'd only stated how much money they made to qualify for 2%, and suddenly their interest rate is 6%, right? So you start having this massive increase in foreclosures. Well, you know, guess who's affected by these foreclosures? Well, obviously the homeowners, but also the mortgage companies, right? Because suddenly they've loaned out all this money and nobody's paying those payments, right? And they've got to take back all these houses in foreclosure. So now not only do you have all these foreclosures, but a ton of mortgage companies start to fail too. So one after another, these banks are failing. Did you know that during the mortgage crisis, 489 banks failed, okay? So now you have all these buyers in foreclosure. You got all these mortgage companies that have closed their doors. Now even the qualified buyers that you do have, they can't even get mortgages, right? Because all these mortgage companies are going out of business, and the ones who haven't are scared and super conservative, right? So let's revisit this principle, this basic economic principle of supply and demand. In the early 2000s, we started out with a pretty good balanced market. You know, those builders are cranking out those homes, those buyers are gobbling them up, right? But now, suddenly you have this massive switch because the builders have still been building all this time, and suddenly your demand collapses. You know, not only do you have the builders, of course, who have been building all this time, but now you've also got all these foreclosed homes flooding the market. So you've got new construction, you've got existing sellers who are maybe motivated because they're about to lose their homes, plus you have all these foreclosures. So you have this massive supply and a complete collapse of demand. And that's what brought on that 2008 housing crisis. And by the way, probably about a decade too late, the government said, oh wait, maybe we should put some government regulation in here to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's what they did. So they put in all of these strict guidelines to help make sure that this crisis doesn't happen again. Meanwhile, all the builders who have been cranking out all these homes all this time, they're going bankrupt one after the other, and all the mortgage companies are also closing their doors, right? So what does that happen? Well, you end up with a whole decade where there's very little building at all. Which brings me to where we are right now. You've probably been wondering, what neighborhood is Wendy canvassing this time? Well, we're out here at Capella Park. And I brought you to Capella Park here in Dallas because it happened here. They broke ground somewhere around 2006. It was supposed to be this completely adorable community, which, you know, today it is. But when the housing crisis happened, everything came to a screeching halt. You had a few houses built, and then it just kind of sat there. We're talking for years, nothing happened. And that's very much a picture of what was happening everywhere. You just had this complete cessation of construction because everybody has, you know, their hesitations about building. And so you just have this major issue of under construction. So we've already got this undersupplied market where there's just not enough homes for how many buyers there are. And then COVID hits, right? And all of a sudden you have these stay-at-home orders, right? Everybody needs to stay at home, so manufacturing grinds to a halt. You know, you've got countries closing down their borders, so shipping comes to a halt. And then you've got supply line shortages. So now there you are in COVID already with the housing shortage, but never fear, we've got this awful pandemic, but the Fed is gonna step in and they're gonna save the day. And how do they do that? Well, they lower interest rates down to like 2 and 3%, okay? So, you know, the difference too, I should tell you, is that when the Fed is lowering interest rates, they are fixed. These aren't teaser rates, they're not adjustable. But you know what else the Fed is also doing is they're making sure that those strict lending requirements are going to stay in place. Nevertheless, those low interest rates did exactly what they were supposed to do. They stimulated the economy, they stimulated inflation, and you know what? They fueled the housing market in a massive way because we already had a supply issue, right? Well, now, even though, and listen, keep in mind, we've got stricter lending guidelines now, right? Because the government fixed that back in 2008, 2009. Even with those stricter guidelines, more and more buyers are coming on the scene because, you know, buyers that couldn't afford a home at 6%, well, gosh, at 2 or 3%, they sure can, right? So you have all of these buyers flooding the market, right? And we began to see this just absolute buying frenzy with prices just spiraling upward and upward faster and faster. And boy, not only did you have a supply problem before COVID hit, but now you've really got one. So the Fed responds once again, they're going to raise interest rates, right? So is that going to cause a massive string of foreclosures? Well, no, because we talked about the fact that the homeowners are not going to be affected. Their monthly payments aren't going to change. But is it going to affect buyers entering in the market? Yeah, it sure is. In fact, you're going to have a lot of buyers who can no longer afford to buy a home at the higher interest rate, right? So that's going to slow down demand. You're also going to have investors that flip homes that are going to find that it just doesn't make sense to do that anymore because their mortgage payments while they're flipping the homes is too high. And you're also going to find would-be landlords who are just no longer interested because the home doesn't cash flow at the current interest rate. So are all of those things, though, going to bring on a massive crash? Well, no, I mean, to see a massive crash or a bubble bursting, you've got to see something massive, right? In 2008, we saw massive foreclosures, massive bank failures. You know, you got to see something massive like that to cause a massive crash. And really what we're seeing today, that is not on the horizon. But what are we going to see? We're going to see the market slow down. We're going to see interest rates bring the market back to a healthy level. And really, isn't that exactly what we all want? We're tired of those bidding wars. We're tired of seeing values spiral up and up and up to where they can't, you know, nobody can afford them anymore. All right, so hopefully, tell me, was this video helpful? Did it help you kind of get a picture of 2008 versus 2022 and whether or not history is going to repeat itself? You know, maybe history does repeat itself, But in this case, we're not talking about the exact same history. Things, in fact, are very different. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful. Listen, if you got a move in your future, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to help you get settled. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.